Hey, welcome to the third installment of this series, your own DIY affordable Western hunt. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, hunting, the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm blessed to serve you as host today. I'm going to skip over the normal bio because this is the third installment. I don't pretend to think that everybody that listens hangs on every word that I say and listens to every episode. This is the gear episode, and I know people might click right on this one because it says gear. This is the third installment, so even if this is the first one you find, hopefully you go back and listen to the first two, and there'll be a bio in there as to why you should care about what I have to say about this stuff. Now, first off, I'm not going to start with guns and ammo. Alright, I'm going to start off with, you got to get there. And whether you are flying in or doing a road trip, four-wheel drive. Get a four-wheel drive. This is not the East Coast. You are not, 2 miles from a Dollar General or even 2 miles from a paved road. Get a good four-wheel drive vehicle. Borrow a four-wheel drive vehicle. If you're doing a road trip with some buddies, get one of them that has a truck or a really big SUV. I actually prefer a really big SUV. Or get a truck with a topper. And here's the reason why. We talked about in the first episode what's important to you. Now, if tent camping is what's important to you and you just love tent camping, then whatever, that's fine. But if this is your first time, if you're going to scout out your own spots, do your own scouting, hunting trip, there are vast wilderness areas out west. Just go look up the size of the BLM lands, National Forest lands, U.S. Forest Service lands, wilderness areas that touch each other in central Idaho. That's bigger than most eastern states, much of which has no roads. So, if you've ever done a bit of tent camping, you know that taking the tent and setting it up and taking it down, that's time, right? And if you're on a trip where you've taken a week off of work, if you have to spend a big chunk of your day every day taking up and putting down a tent because you don't like the spot you're in, you're going to go find another spot, that's kind of a pain. Or if you've been hiking all day, or we're not talking about, walking 100 yards on flat ground to a tree stand. We're talking about maybe literally hiking mountains. When you get done at the end of the day, it's nice to just lay down in a flat, dry area. So an SUV like a Suburban or like an F-150 with a truck topper, where you can just have your beds laid out in the back. One for the road trip if you're driving, so you can just stop and get a couple hours of sleep. Don't have to worry about getting a hotel. That's just money saved, right? Or an SUV if you are from the south and you're used to warmth and you go out west and it's bitter cold, an SUV where you can just turn on the heat for a couple of minutes in the middle of the night to get the vehicle warmed up. It's more convenient. For somebody that does this a lot, take it from me. Get a vehicle, a four-wheel drive, that's big enough for you to sleep in the back of. Bring a tent if you want that to be part of your trip. But if you're trying to figure out, where you're going to hunt, at least for those times, a good four-wheel drive vehicle you can sleep in the back of. And also, obviously, mats to sleep on, a sleeping bag, that kind of stuff. And vehicle recovery stuff, even if it is a four-wheel drive. At least, even if it's not your vehicle, even if you're renting a vehicle, at least have a tow strap. Because a lot of people that are going to be in these areas, if you come across somebody, they're probably going to have a truck that's four-wheel drive. If you got nothing else and if you have nothing else but you have a tow strap, it's likely they can get you out of there. Don't expect to have cell service and AAA and all this other stuff out there. As far as the camping gear goes, if you want a tent, get a tent appropriate for the amount of people that you have. Good sleeping bag, good sleeping pad. I don't tend to prefer the inflatable mattresses. I tend to prefer just the foam ones because I'm hard on stuff and they're less likely to break. But something like that. A good sleeping bag appropriate for the weather you're going to be in. And we'll get into packs, but as far as sleep stuff goes, you also want like a lightweight emergency sleeping bag and or bivy in your pack in case you get caught out at night and you don't make it back to the truck. It's too dangerous for you to try to get back. You stayed out too long, you got lost. A good emergency sleep system in your pack is important as well. Now let's talk about packs since we mentioned it. A good pack. Again, this is not back east Europe unless you just, by providence, just happen to shoot a deer right outside your truck as soon as you get out and you see a deer or a black bear or whatever. This is not like back east where you get a buddy and you drag a deer. Most of this terrain, you're not dragging a deer. It's just not practical. You are, which you should learn, you are cutting this animal up, you are gutting it, a lot of times deboning it, and putting it in a pack and carrying that animal back to where you are. Not to mention when you go out, you're going to need the normal stuff that you need during the day. A good pack is important. I'm not talking about the little day pack like you have back east where you throw in, I don't know, whatever normal people eat, a Gatorade and a moon pie. I'm talking about a legit pack that you can pack out heavy things with. A soft framed or a hard framed pack. You guys know when I mention gear on this, you should know if you're a regular listener anyway, that I don't take sponsors. I don't get any kickback. I don't get a percentage. I'm just talking about stuff that I've used. I like Eberly stock packs. If you don't do a lot of hiking and rucking and you're not used to really heavy weight, and even if you do, one of my go-to recommendations is the Eberly stock Gun Runner. I really like the Gun Runner. Their Just One is kind of the standard. It's a phenomenal pack. If you are going elk hunting and you plan on packing out an elk, then the Rocky Mountain Elk Pack is also a very good pack from Eberly stock. There are plenty of other good brands. I just have a lot of years of experience with Eberly stock. They're good packs. I've done other episodes on hiking and backpacking, either on Gunfighter Life or Alpha Male Podcast, rucking. You might want to go and give those a listen if you're new to this, but start rucking now, right? Don't wait till you go out west and you shoot an elk and you're looking at a massive dead animal on the side of a mountain and it's starting to rain, and then you have to ruck this thing out. You start rucking now if you plan on doing this kind of hunt. But a good pack, we talked about the sleep system in the pack, your basic survival gear. You should probably have a good fixed blade knife on you, but also have another knife, multi-tool, cutting tool on your pack. You want a hatchet, that's fine. You want some kind of multi-tool or something, that's fine. Redundancy, right? Have one on you, have one in your pack. A good way to start a fire. Basic survival stuff. If it's a ferrocerium rod, a lighter, and modern survival type stuff, right? Have a battery pack. You think your cell phone's, and even if you don't have cell phone service, a lot of times you can use the compass and stuff, the maps on your cell phone. You know, you think your cell phone battery's going to last all day, but the light got turned on in your pocket. You know, I think we've probably all been there, and then you go to pick up your phone and it's dead. So a battery pack with a cable. Also, many accessories nowadays are USB rechargeable. I would advise you to get something like a USB rechargeable flashlight, but a battery pack will generally take care of that kind of stuff. A GPS, if you're using like a GPS system, you can also recharge that with your battery pack. And I would advise you getting some kind of electronic, even if you're good with a map and a compass, I would advise you getting a good GPS system. They don't have to be expensive. Don't rely just on the one on your phone, because this is not back east where you're 2 miles from a Dollar Tree. You may or may not have service. If you have some kind of GPS that doesn't rely on cell service, then you should be better off. Also, analog, have a map and a compass. Have a map of your area and a compass of your area. I advise you to do that. If it's an area you haven't been before, you don't even know like which way to go if you get in trouble, things like that, have a map and a compass. Also on that, this is not gear, this is logistics, but tell somebody where you're going when you do get service. Say, hey, I plan to be in this area. Have somebody back home that's not on the trip that knows what time you're supposed to be back and check in and roughly what area you're going to be in. That way, if you do get lost, injured out in the back country, somebody can find you. That's just common sense, but maybe not common if you've never done it before. Have a plan, have a drop dead time, meaning the wife knows that, hey, if I haven't contacted you by Friday at this time, I'm behind schedule. If I haven't contacted you by Monday, something probably really bad happened. You need to start sending people. Stuff like that. We talked about packs. Clothing appropriate for your area. Now, I could turn this into a whole podcast, but obviously the clothing is going to be different if you're hunting Arizona than if you're hunting the Canadian border of Montana, right? So do your own research on that, but some good clothing. You got to think about what's in your area. Rattlesnakes, cactus. Is it really wet? People often think about a rain jacket, but a lot of places out west where it's really high and grassy, shrubs. If that's wet and you go walking through it, your pants are going to get soaked. So make sure your pants are good to go. And also very, very important, boots. There's lots of different brands of boots, and I'm not even going to recommend any brands on this because feet are very different, right? My feet are probably very different than your feet. So a brand that I may like because they fit me really well may have no bearing on whether they fit you well or not. If you're talking about desert Southwest or most of the drier Southwest areas, cowboy boots are pretty good. I'm not talking about like the drugstore cowboy, urban cowboy, embroidered cowboy boots. I'm talking about actual legit cowboy boots that are made for moving and hiking, not, going to a country western line dance. Real cowboy boots can be really good in those environments. Also, kind of your high-top hiking boots. If you're not accustomed to hiking or in really treacherous terrain, I actually really like trail runners. They're kind of my standard go-to if the terrain allows. I like trail runners. I can cover a lot more ground like that. They're more comfortable. So bring those, and also bring a backup pair of footwear. It could be something as simple as Crocs, something like that to wear around camp to let your feet air out. And socks. Socks are vitally important, not the cheap, white cotton, poly cotton garbage mix cheap socks you find at many places. I'm talking about a good sock for what you want. Could be a really thin, tight nylon sock. It could be a really thick wool sock, alpaca wool or something like that. It could be combinations. It could be a really thin sock that's tight with a pretty big, bulky, loose wool sock on the outside. If your feet get bad enough, it could literally kill you. But even if they're just mildly torn up, bloody, it's going to be a bad time. So take care of your feet. Good quality socks. Water, if you're going to be in an area with water, or you usually can find water, like if you're hunting the coastal rainforest of Oregon, you're going to find pretty clean water. You still want to semi-filter it, but that's not nearly as big a logistics concern. There's so much clean, drinkable water out there in the backcountry. I shouldn't have to tell you that if you're hunting lots of places in Arizona, Utah, you could literally die before you come across water. So your logistics train for water is going to be different. Hydration bladders, I actually don't like them as much. I just like bottles of water. It helps me ration how much I'm drinking better. They're just easier, just bottles of water like Nalgene bottles, and then have your logistics. We talked about having your vehicle, your truck, your SUV, have a couple of 5-gallon, jugs of water in there that you can refill. And then, either way, have some kind of water purification device, even if it's just a water purification tablets. And then food. This is not an episode on diet, but the average American diet is pretty atrocious. But if you're going on this trip, bring what you're going to eat. Unless you're doing this as part of a diet thing to get in better shape, bring sensible food. And then have some emergency food and water in your pack. And that could be as simple as a jar of peanut butter, right? A jar of peanut butter has a lot of calories. You can eat it with your hand. You can eat it with a stick. A jar of peanut butter is a lot of calories. You can just keep in your pack in case you do get stuck out longer than you need. Not everything has to be hyper specialized and cost you an arm and a leg to be effective. Some kind of shovel or mini shovel on your pack often doesn't get talked about, but is one of the things you'll probably use the most. We talked about some kind of emergency shelter and or bivvy, but something like a military surplus poncho or a big, like contractor size, thick plastic bag. Those come in handy a lot. Again, not everything has to cost an arm and a leg. The trip's probably going to be expensive enough, and this is you can get really cool Gucci gear. And if you're the guy that's, just a gear fanatic, and I need the very best emergency ultralight shelter, cool, But I spent a lot of time out in the backcountry, sleeping under a military poncho, making a poncho hooch. So that'll work. Like I said, the big construction, like really thick garbage bags will work also. One thing that even if you're an avid hunter back east, you may not use a lot, but you probably will out west, binoculars. Have a good set of binoculars. I think you're probably better off with, and as much as people talk about, especially this community, because it's a gun podcast, as much as people talk about, what scope should I get, what magnification, what this and what that, I'm going to tell you, if you're decent at woodscraft, you're better off with a good pair of binoculars and iron sights on your rifle than the bestest, biggest, baddest, most giant, obese, magnified scope and no binoculars. Have a good pair of binoculars. I don't think you need a spotting scope. I'm not much for the sitting and glassing for long periods of time kind of person, but some people are. Especially if you don't want to walk around or hike around a lot, you might consider a spotting scope, but definitely a good pair of binoculars. And you don't have to go crazy. 8 power, 10 power, maybe 12 power. Good, decent set. And again, I get no kickbacks or anything, but Leupold makes good binos that are pretty affordable, and Steiner. Steiner's going to cost you a little bit more. Steiners are phenomenal binoculars. Whatever it is, like their military marine grade, those are rugged binoculars. They are clear, they are good, they are rugged. But a good pair of binoculars, that's important. We talked about knives briefly, but a good butchering knife, like a knife that I can, and you could do this with anything, right? But a knife that you wouldn't be upset about butchering a several 100-pound animal on the side of a mountain if you're going out for big game hunting. If you're going out for small game hunting, obviously maybe a different knife. But I've recommended for a long time the Buck 110 Slim if you are a folding knife kind of guy. I prefer a fixed blade, but if you are just a folding blade pocket knife kind of guy, the Buck 110 Slim. If I had just that knife, and I have guided for bison before, and I had to butcher an entire bison, and you just gave me a Buck 110 Slim, I'd be like, okay, let's get to work. It'll get the job done. It's a good knife. Or any other decent quality 3 to 5 inch fixed blade knife. And whatever is appropriate for what you're trying to hunt, right? If you're going out to hunt predators, a predator call. A good predator call for the stuff in your area. Like a dying fawn call is pretty good for a lot of the bigger predators. If you're good at a dying rabbit call or a dying rodent call, those are pretty good. Just a mouth call, right? Simple, easy. Do your practicing before you go out and hunt. But again, not everything has to cost an arm and a leg. You can get some pretty good, pretty cheap predator mouth calls. A Fox Pro if you want it. It's an electronic call if it's legal where you are for whatever you're hunting. We talked a lot about that. Also, don't forget about the animal prep. You might want to bring some salt. If you plan on keeping a hide, you might want some game bags. A lot of times in a lot of the places we talked about, it's not like back east where you're just going to butcher it and put it in coolers or whatever. You're probably just going to hang it. And and depending on the time of year, you may not even have to worry about bugs. You literally may just be able to hang the animal after it's been gutted in a tree, let it cool down, and the cool, dry air will keep it good for quite a while for the rest of the time you're hunting. Somebody else is still hunting for an animal. But like the game and meat bags, if you need to keep bugs off, things like that. This is out west, so if you're in an area that this applies, you really want to kind of hoist that animal up in a tree so a bear doesn't get it. That's a thing. Or wolves if you're in that area. Hauling it up and hanging it in a tree, but some kind of way to process that meat to get it wherever you're going to take it, right? If you're talking about hides, if you're talking about other kinds of hunting, then whatever applies. Alright, let's talk about guns. We talked a lot about small game hunting. Obviously, the shotgun, even if you're going big game hunting, you might want to bring a good shotgun for around camp. A lot of times in western states, if you're out hunting deer, elk, or whatever, you can still shoot different species of small game and grouse. So if you come upon the opportunity, again, even if you're taking like a big centerfire rifle, you may want to bring a shotgun anyway, and also for the road trip, right? The term riding shotgun is a term for a reason. But a good decent shotgun, a good all-around sporting shotgun with a rib, with interchangeable chokes, a simple Mossberg 500. They're not expensive. You probably have a good shotgun for this if you are listening to this and an avid hunter and want to come out west and hunt. And bring an assortment of shot, right? We talked about all kinds of different game bird hunting. Bring some, 9s, 7.5s, 6s. You may come out thinking you're going to hunt a bunch of doves, but you get into an area where there's a lot of chucker, and you might want a different size shot for that. Now, guys, here's the deal. If we're going to start talking about guns and rifles, bro, I'm not your wife, right? You don't have to justify to me why you need a new rifle. All right, you don't. If a big part of the reason that you're doing this hunt is you want a new rifle and you want to justify the purchase of that new rifle, then obviously that's fine. If you've always wanted to build the ultimate varmint rifle and there's really no varmints where you live, then obviously you can do that, right? You don't have to justify it to me. The theme of this is affordable DIY Western hunt. If you want a really high-end specialized rifle and you want to build it for this hunt, then obviously you can do that. Again, I'm not your wife. You don't have to I'm not your accountant. You don't have to justify it to me. I don't care. I'm talking about what you can do to be effective. Now, let's start with varmints. If we're talking about like prairie dogs, whistle pigs, rock chucks, woodchucks, if you're going out to hunt those things, if you have a 22 rimfire, cool. Now, you may have your 22 set up for like general purpose survivaling. You may have it set up with a red dot or a fixed 4 or whatever. This is a time where you may want to go with a little bit bigger magnification. You can just go with your Ruger 1022, maybe get an affordable, higher powered scope, because varmint hunting is one of the places where you really can do better with more magnification. A good bolt action 22 long rifle with a decent scope and learning your holdovers, doing some longer range practice. And long range for the 22, we're talking out to 200 yards on very small targets. A decent scope, you don't need a bipod, just have some kind of good rest if you want, or some kind of bag. Tactical tip of the day: if you have an old pair of pants you're going to cut up and throw away anyway, you can cut off the pant leg, put a zip tie on one end, fill it with whatever media you want for a shooting rest bag or two. You could literally fill it with rice or pea gravel, whatever it is, right? Just a bag to set your gun on. Again, everything has to cost you an arm and a leg. But something like that, if you want a bipod, get a bipod. If you want to move up to center fire, and there's a lot, again, if you want to build the ultimate, varmint rifle, and you've always wanted a 220 Swift, then do it. But kind of the king today is 223, because it's not because it's the best ballistic cartridge, it's not, but because it's so readily available and it's so affordable. If you want to step up to center fire, especially if you're going to do things like coyote and larger things like that 223, a good bolt action 223 with a decent scope on it, Savage Axis, you're looking for a good affordable one. And then obviously the Ruger American makes a good gun for the money. And generally with a 223, a lot of people nowadays, especially for the ARs and stuff, they want heavier bullets. I want a 77 grain giant uber long match bullet. Historically, and you could do different than this if you know what you're doing and you really want to, but generally, historically, and what you should probably stick to if you're new to it, you want lighter, faster bullets. You're talking about in a 223, like a 35 grain, a 40 grain, a 45 grain bullet, going at screaming fast velocities. If you want to use something else, that's fine. But if you want to get a decent, affordable 223 bolt gun with a decent scope on it, with the varmint bullets that it shoots well, that's a pretty good, affordable varmint setup. Also, if you already have an AR, you have one set up like a recce rifle, an LPVO is not great for this, but if you already have one and it's super accurate and you mostly want to, part of the reason you want to go out is to train and hunt varmints with your go-to rifle, a good recce setup AR, not like one with a red dot or something like that, but a good like LPVO is not the worst varmint hunting rifle ever. It's not as good as a dedicated varmint hunting rifle. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm saying if that's what you have and you don't want to buy a new rifle and that's what you want to take for varmints, for coyote and various different other vermin, it will work just fine. If we are talking about bigger animals, again, you don't have to justify it to me, but if you have a good deer rifle back east and you're going to hunt deer out west, it's probably going to be okay. That bolt action 308 is a fine western hunting rifle as well. You want to buy a new hunting rifle, again, you don't have to justify it to me if you've always wanted the 7 mag. But I would caution you against the magnums unless you really know what you're doing. You probably don't need a magnum. Probably just hunt with whatever you have. Now, if the deer you're going to be hunting or you're going to step up to elk, if you get a tag, just be sensible. Keep your ranges moderate. And if you don't really know anatomy and you haven't really hunted elk before, I would advise you, if you're hunting elk, keep it to a good broadside shot. If you're hunting, mule deer, pronghorn, anything like that, 243 and up is good. If you are hunting elk, 270 or even 30-30 and up in caliber, up in power, as much people want to think you need these super long range ultra magnum 7 PRCs and stuff to hunt elk, many an elk have gone to the freezer with a 30-30. Especially if you don't do a lot of that longer type hunting and you're just coming out west to hunt, you probably, unless that's just your thing and that's what you want to do, I'm not putting that down. I'm just saying you can get it done with a 30-30. I live in the Wild West. Plenty of people around here still hunt with 30-30s. It's a thing. I think sometimes we get so insulated in our little bubbles, like, these very uber specialized sponsored hunters with all this crazy long range gear, all this crazy, this next cartridge came out that's 150 feet per second faster, you gotta have it. But you don't gotta have it. You can do just fine with a 30-30, with an old 270, with a 308, with a 30-06. So if you have a decent deer rifle, unless you just want to buy a western rifle because you've always wanted to, again, that's fine. But if you have a good deer rifle, it's probably good. What I would encourage you, instead of looking at a new rifle first, is looking at ammo selection first. You may want to move up to a different style of bullet. If you are hunting elk, you may want to look at a bonded bullet. If you are curious about copper, now might be a good time to start shooting those and see how they do in your gun. Solid coppers tend to do pretty well, especially if you're kind of fighting up in caliber, meaning you're using like a smaller end of the caliber range for the game you're hunting. Coppers can do pretty well. Not that you have to, but you might want to look up to a bonded bullet or a premium bullet instead of buying a new gun. I would rather have like a 308 with Nosler partitions than a 300 Win Mag with the cheapest non-bonded cup and core bullet I could find. So maybe looking at that more expensive tailor-made ammo. Nosler Accubons, Nosler partitions, Barnes TSX, TTSX, Terminal Ascents, some kind of bonded bullet, right? If that floats your boat, if that gets you going, maybe up the ammo, unless you just want a new rifle. And instead of worrying about the latest and greatest, maybe choose an ammo that has some street cred, right? That a lot of hunters know is known for being good on game. Keep your ranges reasonable. Put some thought into your ammo selection. Keep your shot angles reasonable. And you'll probably be okay. I just want to, in getting ready to close out this episode, tell you that I did the gear episode last, because it's not of paramount importance. Yeah, some of this gear will help, but that's not the main thing. Do you crave something wild in your life, something raw? To go out into a deserted place and rest a while? Maybe physically demanding, but spiritually pure and restful. Something real and tangible and primal to see the glory of God and His creation. If that calls to you, maybe a Western hunt is a good thing for you to pursue. And with that, guys, there's been a few tactical tips sprinkled in. But those Mylar space blankets, those are not just a gimmick. They're not the greatest thing. I consider them like a one-time use thing usually, but they do work. You may want to have one of those even if you have an emergency shelter in your pack. You may want to have one of those in your pocket in case you get separated from your pack, something happens. It's good to have redundancy. And also, your tactical tip, you can use those to process your game. If you're like me and you like heart and liver and things like that, and you don't want to get them all sandy and dirty. Like muscle tissue is pretty easy to scrape off and clean and, wash in a creek. But the other tissues, not so much. But you can lay it down for all the stuff. You lay it down on the ground. It's going to be shiny, but you've already killed your animal, so you're probably not worried about hiding. You lay it out on the ground and you lay your meat on it to stop it from getting sandy, covered in pine needles, things like that. Again, because this is not back east. You're probably not dragging that whole deer back to camp. You're probably processing it and maybe even deboning it right there on the side of the mountain or wherever it is you shot it. Laying one of those down can really help keep that meat a lot cleaner and just gives you way less work later. You're not trying to pick sand out of it in a sink somewhere once you get back home and are turning it into steaks or sausage or whatever you do. Your tactical verse from 1 Kings: I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man. Thanks for listening, men, and have a blessed day.